What do you think the most secure prison in the world looks like? High walls, barbed wire, guards armed to the teeth? Sounds about right. But what if I told you there was a man who looked at all of that and saw it as just a slightly complicated puzzle? A man for whom handcuffs were just a clunky fashion accessory and prison bars were more of a decorative suggestion than an actual obstacle. Today, we're not talking about Houdini and his stage-managed illusions. We're talking about a real-life legend, an artist of freedom, a man who turned escaping prison into a high art form. Welcome to the story of Yoshie Shiratori, the escape king of Japan, a man who broke out of 4 different prisons, each time in a more unbelievable way than the last, forcing the authorities to question the very definition of the word impossible. Our story begins in 1930s Japan. Shiratori was initially just an ordinary guy until he was framed for murder and sentenced to prison. Facing brutal treatment behind bars, he decided that, well, if the system wouldn't give him justice, he would just have to go find freedom for himself. And so began his cross-country tour of Japan's most secure prisons. Picture Aomori Prison in the 1930s. Cold, monotonous, and ruled by one unwavering principle. Everything ran on a schedule. For most inmates, this was mental torture, but for Shiratori, it was a treasure map. He didn't just comply. He observed with terrifying focus. Lying on his mat, his eyes half closed, his ears operated like state-of-the-art radar. He could distinguish the footsteps of each guard, knew which one had a habit of coughing after dinner, and which one would slow his patrol pace at 3 a.m. And then he found it, a time loophole. Every night, for exactly 15 minutes, as the old guard's shift grew tired and the new one had yet to fully settle in, the entire prison fell into a state of near-perfect complacency. Those 15 minutes were his. Now for the tools. While others looked at a wooden bathing bucket and thought about personal hygiene, Shiratori's brain operated on a different frequency. He saw the thin metal strips used to bind the wooden planks. That wasn't just metal, it was a key. During his rare bathing times, with a sleight of hand that would make a magician jealous, he managed to detach a small piece of wire without anyone noticing, hiding it masterfully. And then the fateful night arrived. In the pitch-black darkness of his cell, Shiratori went to work. This wasn't a flashy Hollywood lockpick scene. This was a dance of patience. He threaded the wire into the lock, listening. Every tiny click of the tumblers echoed louder than thunder in the silence. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady as a rock. And then, clack, the door swung open. He had turned the guard's 15 minutes of carelessness into his first ticket to freedom. The next morning, when the guards brought breakfast, all they found was an empty cell and a brand new legend. The illustrious career of Shiratori was officially open for business. After being recaptured, the Japanese authorities decided they had been too soft. This time, they gave Shiratori a special escape-proof VIP suite at Akita Prison. The concrete walls were smooth and impossibly high. Not a single crack or handhold. On the ceiling was a single window, but it was framed with metal, and so high up, it seemed to exist only to let light in, not people out. They confidently patted themselves on the back. This time, not even a ghost could get out. They were wrong. They underestimated the creativity of a man with too much time on his hands and his back against the wall, or more accurately, between 4 walls. Shiratori looked up at that window, not with despair, but with the eyes of an engineer about to tackle a project. His plan was as insane as it was brilliant. He would climb up there. But how? His technique is what professional climbers call chimneying. Every night, with darkness as his only ally, Shiratori began his grueling physical training. He pressed his back against one wall, his feet against the opposite wall, and used pure muscle strength to slowly inch his way up. Imagine the incredible pressure on his body, sweat pouring down, every centimeter a battle against gravity. He became a human gecko, defying the normal laws of physics. He couldn't do it in one night. This plan required patience. Every night, he would climb a little, use a small piece of metal he'd chipped from his food tray to slowly loosen the mortar around the window frame, and then climb back down before dawn, erasing all traces of his work. And then, on a stormy night, when the roaring thunder and whistling wind provided the perfect symphony to cover any sound, Shiratori made his final move. He climbed one last time, broke through the weakened window frame, scrambled onto the rain-soaked roof, and vanished into the stormy night. The next morning, the guards could only stare up at the gaping hole in the ceiling and probably began to wonder if they had been guarding a man or some kind of lizard-monkey hybrid.
By now, the Japanese government was no longer amused. This was a national embarrassment. They sent Shiratori to the most fearsome place in their arsenal, the hell on earth of the Japanese prison system, Abashiri in Hokkaido. Here, the winters could drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. They didn't just build him a special cell, they fitted him with custom-made handcuffs and shackles. They were solid blocks of metal with no keyholes, riveted shut, and only removable with special tools. The cell door was a thick slab of steel with only a tiny slot for food to be passed through. Shiratori had been turned into an object in a metal box. They had planned for everything, except for one variable: miso soup. Every day, Shiratori was given a bowl of hot miso soup, and every day he turned his meal into a long-term chemistry experiment. He wouldn't finish it. Instead, he would discreetly spit the salty broth, with purpose, onto his handcuffs and onto the hinges of the food slot. Day after day, week after week, month after month. The salt in the miso, the silent enemy of metal, went to work. Oxidation began its slow, relentless process, eating away at the iron molecules. Shiratori, the unwitting chemist, was dissolving his prison from the inside out. After months of insane perseverance, the metal had corroded to the point where it could be broken with human strength. But that was only half the battle. The remaining problem? How could a grown man fit through a slot barely big enough for a food tray? The answer lay in another of Shiratori's incredible natural talents. He could dislocate his shoulders at will. This was no magic trick. It was a painful, agonizing skill that required phenomenal body control. In the dark of night, he exerted all his strength, and a sickening pop echoed as his shoulder came out of its socket. Turning his body into something pliable and boneless, he slowly contorted himself and squeezed himself through that narrow opening, leaving behind the corroded cuffs and a cell once sworn to be impenetrable. This time, the guards weren't just surprised, they were terrified. The legend of Yoshie Shiratori, Shiratori the Monster, began to spread. Caught for the fourth time, the Japanese authorities seemed to have run out of ideas. Concrete, steel, and special locks were all useless. This time, they tried a new tactic, fighting a man with men. At Sapporo prison, Shiratori was placed in a cell and given special attention by 6 guards. 6 men in shifts staring at him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their eyes never left him. They watched him eat, they watched him sleep, they watched him breathe. This was the human wall, the ultimate biological surveillance system. It seemed to be the end of the line. But they made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the power of boredom. To Shiratori, those 6 pairs of eyes weren't a threat. They were an audience. And he decided to perform his final magic trick, the disappearing act. His weapon this time, once again, a mundane object, his soup bowl. He returned to the most classic escape method of all, digging a tunnel. Right under their feet, right in front of 6 pairs of watchful eyes, Shiratori began his work. He used the edge of his bowl to gently pry up a floorboard and then began scratching away at the dirt, bit by bit. He hid the excavated earth in small pouches he'd fashioned inside his clothes. He was a master of misdirection. He would fake a coughing fit, pretend to have a seizure, or simply sit motionless for hours staring at a wall, causing the guards themselves to grow tired and complacent. They saw a prisoner sitting still, but in reality, under his mat, his hands were working tirelessly. They were looking, but they weren't seeing. Their overconfidence and their boredom became the perfect curtain for Shiratori's plan. And then one morning, the 6 guards were still there, but their prisoner was gone. They looked down and saw a neat hole in the floor. Shiratori hadn't broken through walls or picked any locks. He had simply gone underground and resurfaced somewhere else. This 4th and final escape was a final stinging slap in the face to the arrogance of the surveillance system. It was the ultimate proof that no wall, whether made of concrete or of men, could stop a will determined to find freedom. So why did the escape king finally stop? After his last escape, during a year on the run, Shiratori happened to meet a police officer in a park. Instead of arresting him, the officer offered him a cigarette and listened to his story. For the first time, Shiratori felt he was being treated like a human being, not an animal to be caged. Moved by this kindness, he confessed and turned himself in. He was sentenced to 20 years, but this time he served his sentence peacefully, eventually being paroled for good behavior. He lived out the rest of his life quietly, becoming a living legend in Japanese popular culture. The story of Yoshie Shiratori really makes you think. He committed illegal acts, but his motivation came from fighting a system he saw as brutal and unjust. He used his intelligence, patience, and extraordinary physical abilities not to harm anyone, but simply to win his own freedom. So in the end, who was Yoshie Shiratori? A cunning criminal? An escape artist? Or living proof that no wall can contain the human will to be free, as long as you have enough miso soup and a little bit of audacity? That answer, perhaps, depends on your point of view.